One ring to rule them all. One ring to find them. One ring to bring them all. And in the darkness bind them.
The Lord of the Rings. It's not just about hobbits and elves, you know. I first read The Lord of the Rings when I was in my teens. I simply couldn't believe what a good book it was. I was gripped, and it's been with me ever since.
But the world is full of great books, so why this particular one? It's not about issues and modern life. It doesn't offer us psychological insights into human nature, and it's certainly not an exploration of our emotions.
No, it's about more than that. It's a work of immense imagination, like no other. It's epic. It's inspiring. It's a story with roots completely entwined with our culture and our history, and a tale that champions the values of long-lost ways of living and totally connects us to the land which surrounds us.
The Lord of the Rings is set in the imaginary world of Middle-earth, a place populated by all sorts of beings, from elves and hobbits to men and dwarves. At the start of the book, the peaceful equilibrium has been broken, and a titanic struggle is developing between good and evil. Tolkien characterizes the evil with exquisite simplicity as an all-seeing eye that preys on the characters and drives the whole story with its malevolence. He's such a great wordsmith, it's the perfect image, and like so much of Tolkien, it demands to be read aloud.
Indeed, as far as I'm concerned, the whole thing is meant to be read out. Just like the great sagas that have been passed down through our history, Tolkien intended the story to be heard as much as read. The eye. That horrible, growing sense of a hostile will that strove with great power to pierce all shadows of cloud and earth and flesh, and to see you, to pin you under its deadly gaze, naked, immovable.
The Eye is Sauron, Lord of the Dark Land of Mordor. Thousands of years ago, he forged a ring that gave him power over everything. The One Ring to rule them all. But it was cut from him in battle and lost. Now that ring has been found. If Sauron retrieves it, darkness will rule Middle-earth.
The ring is, of course, a symbol of power. And just like power, it corrupts. Absolutely. And the force of this ring is such that the only way to prevent it creating further evil is to destroy it.
The only way to rid Middle-earth of its threat is to enter the heart of darkness and cast it into the volcanic fire in which it was originally forged, known as the Crack of Doom. So who is the Lord of the Rings?
That's whoever holds the ring that Sauron created, the One Ring to rule them all. And for most of the book, that's a hobbit, one of the small folk who live in underground homes and love nothing more than eating and telling stories. They live somewhere like this, the Shire. It's a beautiful place and a harmonious natural existence.
And it's a hobbit, Frodo Baggins, who is the hero of the Lord of the Rings. For only hobbits have the innocence that can endure prolonged contact with the ring. But even they are not immune. Frodo undertakes to carry the ring back into Sauron's lair, a journey that will last 6 months and take years off this young hobbit's life.
Tolkien imbues the ring with a real life of its own. He does this in an incredibly physical way. Not since Excalibur has an object been invested with such personality.
With every step towards the gates of Mordor, Frodo felt the ring on its chain about his neck grow more burdensome. He was now beginning to feel it as an actual weight dragging him earthwards. One of the things that makes The Lord of the Rings so important to me is the way the countryside of Middle-earth itself comes alive, like an extra character within the story. It's clear Tolkien felt the value of the natural world very deeply. In this book, nature is a conscious force. Trees live and breathe, and the landscape of the story and the landscape of the imagination merge to become indistinguishable. Almost immediately, Tolkien introduces us to the extraordinary Tom Bombadil. He's unlike any other character in the story. We're told he's been around since before the rivers and trees. He remembers the first raindrop and the first acorn. He's elemental, a force of nature, and for me he sets out Tolkien's view of the natural order of things.
As he writes, the trees and the grasses and all things growing or living on the land belong each to themselves. In the natural world, power does not corrupt. Tom Bombadil can handle the ring without feeling its effect. He's the only character able to do this, and that's because he's Tolkien's manifestation of nature itself. Mischievous, but without malice.
Even the way he often speaks in a sing-song voice has a natural rhythm, very like some of the indigenous peoples I've met over the years. It's timeless. Hey doll, merry doll, ring-a-dong dillo, ring-a-dong hop along, fall the willow. Tom bom, jolly Tom, Tom Bombadillo. Our sense of the connection between all living things is tapped into by Tolkien too. Most obviously with my favourite creation, walking, talking trees, the Ents.
One of the things I really like about this book is the way that trees are treated with exactly the same respect as all other living things. In fact, more than that, they're given real personality. When you spend as much time in the woods as I do, that's something you can really relate to. Take a look at this one. Doesn't that look as though he's standing guard over the forest?
Their leader is known as Treebeard, and he rallies the trees to help.
How could I not like a book in which trees do battle against evil? It's quite clear that Tolkien held trees with a very high regard and had a concern for the way we abuse them. He voices this through Treebeard, who, when asked whose side he was on, replied, "I'm not altogether on anybody's side, because nobody is altogether on my side." Tolkien began writing The Lord of the Rings in 1937. Consequently, lots of people leap to the conclusion that the story is really about the rise of Hitler and the Nazis. They say that Sauron's hordes of brutish orcs are the stormtroopers in Hitler's Germany, and the destruction they wreak, well, that's the mechanized death of the Blitzkrieg.
And there's certainly a case for this. After all, in 1937, Hitler's threat was increasing daily. To many, he already seemed unstoppable. And the combination of lies, deceit, and brute force used by Sauron and his cohorts is certainly in keeping with Nazi Germany and their conquest of Western Europe.
But this is something that Tolkien himself always strongly denied. It's a deceptively easy parallel to make, but one that ignores so many other influences that he could have drawn upon.
In his early childhood, John Ronald Reuel Tolkien lived in a typical English village, but when he was 8, he had to move into the centre of nearby Birmingham. From there he watched as the rural landscape of his childhood was engulfed by the ever-expanding city. The industrial process can be an unforgiving thing. Left unchecked, its appetite can be insatiable, rather like Mordor, wouldn't you say? Many people argue that this is one of the central themes that underpins The Lord of the Rings, and it seems to me Tolkien uses Frodo to champion what this process throws away. He plants Frodo's feet firmly in the Shire. In our rush to embrace change, we've forgotten the value of what we already had. It's a message that's just as important today. There's no reason progress can't go hand in hand with heritage, culture and nature.
They each deserve equal value, or just like in Lord of the Rings, darkness will overshadow our lives. It's a wonderful book to take with you on a journey because it's such a complete world to disappear into. A work of stunning creative invention. Even though the story crosses a continent, every detail has been thought through. Tolkien is describing a single leaf. You can be sure he's worked out everything about the tree upon which it's growing.
Throughout all three books that make up the saga, he gives us the usual stuff like geography, but also the history of the people of Middle-earth and all their myths and songs. He even includes appendices of family trees and the lineage of the ruling houses.
You know, I'm convinced Tolkien knew more about the history of Middle-earth than most of us can remember of our own history. As with all great books, at the heart of The Lord of the Rings is a great story, the saga of Frodo's journey carrying the ring into Sauron's lair. Tolkien presents this as a trilogy, and frankly, it's more epic for it.
It's a bit like building a shelter. You need to start with a solid structure, and the trilogy allows Tolkien to weave an incredible tale. The Fellowship of the Ring gives us the foundation of the story, the formation of a group to help destroy the ring. In the Two Towers, he adds layers of complication as the Fellowship split up and we follow their different stories across Middle-earth. The Return of the King delivers the climactic end of the saga with a stupendous battle against Mordor and, of course, reveals the final destiny of Frodo and the ring. But a great plot is nothing without characters you care about, and Tolkien coats his tale with a rich mixture. Of these, probably the most important is Gandalf.
Gandalf is a wizard, but not just a magician who performs tricks. I have to admit, he's one of the characters within the book that I have the most admiration for. He's everybody's favourite uncle, the person you turn to most in any hour of need, and Frodo and his friends find themselves in plenty of need. The odds they face are huge. In page after page, Tolkien relentlessly builds a sense of threat and epic adventure. The story is like a closing vice, with a constant threat from without and from within. So not only are they pursued by wraiths sent by Sauron, but the ring itself is like a traitor amongst them, willing them to make mistakes. Frodo and his friends are camped on the top of a mountain. They think they hear something, and then they feel, rather than see, shadows looking down on them. Frodo thought that he heard a faint hiss as of venomous breath, and felt a thin, piercing chill. They're ring wraiths, destined to hunt the ring for eternity. And when they attack, Frodo, the hero of the book, remember, is as scared as anyone. But his terror was swallowed up in a sudden temptation to put on the ring. Instantly we see the power and the evil of the ring as he's sucked into the same dimension as the wraiths, and they're revealed to him in clear sight. But it's only in adversity that we see the true measure of someone. for just as he can see them, so Frodo realizes that wearing the ring reveals his whereabouts to all forces of darkness, including Sauron. With a last effort, Frodo, dropping his sword, slipped the ring from his finger and closed his right hand tight upon it.
Tolkien said that he'd always been impressed that we are here surviving because of the indomitable courage of quite small people against impossible odds. That's a sentence that could sum up Frodo and his task.
He could also sum up the bravery and the courage of the troops that fought and died here on the Western Front during the First World War. Men like Tolkien, who saw action himself at the Battle of the Somme near the French village of Auvillers, just over there.
And it's fair to say that it's far more likely that it was the First, rather than the Second World War, that influenced Tolkien's writing in The Lord of the Rings. Frodo and his dependable companion Sam Gamgee are the ultimate foot soldiers, with no special skills, but honest determination and courage.
Tolkien actually said that his Sam Gamgee was a reflection of the type of soldier and batsman that he served alongside during the 1914 war. The list of those that won medals is absolutely full of ordinary people like him, and there are many more whose deeds of heroism went unsung.
And The Lord of the Rings features several epic battles that are much more akin to the struggles of the First World War than other conflicts, like the battle for the fortress stronghold of Helm's Deep. Tens of thousands of orcs flung at the battlements, cut down by the arrows of a valiant defence.
The setting may be a castle, but the whole concept, particularly the waste of life, absolutely reeks of the Western Front during the First World War. I often wonder whether The Lord of the Rings isn't actually Tolkien's tribute to his fallen comrades.
In the winter, the whole Western Front was reduced to a huge quagmire littered with the dead, very like the marshes that Frodo must cross to reach the gates of Mordor, with a dead lie to tempt you into their pools.
His guide through this is one of the truly great creations of any book, Gollum. In a previous tale by Tolkien, called The Hobbit, it was Gollum who had possession of the ring, which he called his precious. But it's only in The Lord of the Rings that we truly come to understand just how totally the ring has destroyed his life.
Gollum acquired his name because of the noise he constantly makes. Gollum, Gollum. But his real name is Smeagol, which actually means penetrating or creeping in Old English, perfect for someone as tricky and slippery as Gollum. The ring has so destroyed him, it's taken over his whole character. Smeagol is a fading memory who can't even hold his own when talking to himself.
Smeagol promised to help the master. Yes, to help the master. The master of the precious. But if we was master, then we could help ourselves. Yes, and still keep promises.
He's a wretched creature, utterly obsessed with the ring, but he does have the best lines.
Where is it? Where is it, my precious? My precious. It's ours, it is, and we want it.
And just as Frodo begins to see what the ring has done to Gollum, so we begin to fear what it will do to Frodo.
My precious, my precious, my precious.
Tolkien only wrote The Lord of the Rings because his publisher asked for a sequel to The Hobbit. What a sequel! But at first they thought they had a flop on their hands. Indeed, they anticipated that they'd make a loss on it, and only reluctantly published the 3 books, one after another, in the mid-50s. Lucky for us, they took the risk. The scale of The Lord of the Rings is unbelievable.
I'm barely scratching the surface, There's so much in this book, there's no way on earth that I can cover it all here. In fact, it's hard to believe that it all came from the mind of just one person.
Like so many things, we tend to take these sorts of books for granted today, but ancient skills have a habit of disappearing, and in the brave new world of the 1930s, when Tolkien was writing it, our myth-making traditions had all but dried up. It has been argued that our mythological past was cut off by the brutality of the Norman conquests.
But the pen is mightier than the sword, they say. So Tolkien, who studied the development of languages and became a professor at Oxford, set out to reconnect us to the spirit of ancient Britain and its myths.
And to support this, he even invented new languages for the people of Middle-earth.
What Tolkien did was bring the magic back to our literature.
Tolkien looked to Northern Europe for his inspiration. Frodi was an Old Norse king. Gandalf means sorcerer in ancient Norse. The Scandinavian grandfather of all our myths is Beowulf, the story of a Norse warrior who is mortally wounded defeating the monstrous Grendel and a dragon.
There's a lot of Beowulf in The Lord of the Rings, not least what Tolkien considered to be one of the main themes. It's not the wages of sin that is death, rather the wages of heroism is death.
Tolkien wasn't interested in simple storytelling. Frodo's life is in danger from the moment he volunteers to carry the ring, and Tolkien is an author you underestimate at your peril. Of course, a bit of history and a dash of culture don't necessarily make a great read, but when you wrap it in a classic adventure story, it exerts a hold like that of the ring itself. Of all the fantastic moments in the book, the best illustration of this is Gandalf's moment of truth in the mines of Moria.
Everything comes together here. Tolkien's skill as a wordsmith, the breadth of his imagination, and his skill as a storyteller. It's also a scene that demonstrates his use of pathos and emotion.
As they pass through the mines, they're pursued by a great monster.
It's called a Balrog, and it falls to Gandalf to confront it on the bridge of Khazad-dûm.
The fire in it seemed to die, but the darkness grew. It stepped forward slowly onto the bridge, and suddenly it drew itself up to a great height, and its wings were spread from wall to wall. But still, Gandalf could be seen, glimmering in the gloom. He seemed small and altogether alone, grey and bent, like a wizened tree before the onset of a storm.
Gandalf never wavers. He'd be the perfect person to take on an expedition. To destroy the beast, he smashes the bridge upon which they're standing.
With a terrible cry, the Balrog fell forward, and its shadow plunged down and vanished. But even as it fell, it swung its whip, and the thongs lashed and curled about the wizard's knees, dragging him to the brink. He staggered and fell, grasped vainly at the stone, and slid into the abyss.
Fly, you fool!
He cried, and was gone. What an exit! Frodo's most powerful ally has vanished. He's miles from his destination, and the ring is beginning to get to him. The forces of Mordor are on the march. As the book progresses, Tolkien weaves an ever more involved tale. But his great skill is that he does it on such an epic scale. It isn't just new characters that appear, but whole new civilizations. Tolkien's writing is like some great river fed by many tributaries. It's 1,000 pages of the most perfectly plotted saga you'll ever read. Trying to capture it in just half an hour is like trying to hold a waterfall in your hands.
But at least we've shown you the essence.
I'm not going to tell you the ending. It's more complex than you might imagine. But what else would you expect from Tolkien? You'll just have to read the book. Like Gandalf and all the other members of the Fellowship, you'll want it as a lifelong companion.
Because to get to that moment in the story where Frodo finally faces his destiny on the slopes of Mount Doom requires a considerable investment of both time and effort. Perhaps that's why people so love the book. After all, you only get out of life what you put into it.
Reading Tolkien is like entering a vast panorama. More than any other novel, The Lord of the Rings isn't just a book. It roots itself so firmly in a way of living that it reawakens in us many of the things we need to hold dear.
When I stand somewhere like this, I can really understand what Tolkien was driving at. We're in such a hurry today. Places like this encourage us to move at a more natural pace. To say that they're important would be an understatement. They're vital.
It's not too late. The Lord of the Rings reminds us we have the freedom to choose. It's a book that champions the values of an almost forgotten way of life and shows us that being is more important than having.
It's about history, it's about culture, but most of all, it's about our deep connection to the land we live in. Truly, for me, this is the one book to rule them all.
Well, this book has inspired films, games, and fantasies. To people like Mears, who practically worship it, Lord of the Rings is the best book in the known or unknown universe.